Ed Roberts. Ed Roberts knew of Paul Allen and Bill, and they were looking. You got to understand, there was no software other than toggling switches. 32 of them, I believe. And so he wanted to do something that you could boot this thing up and not have to go through all the sequences. So he hired Bill Gates and Paul Allen, and it may have been the other way around, to develop a software called BASIC,
Mm-hmm.
which would basically boot up your computer
Mm-hmm.
to get it started. To do what with? They really at that time didn't have any idea, because they were in kit form. The only ones that are interested in them were electronic guys that wanted something new and wondrous.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ed Roberts was looking down the road to be able to do this and make it what we would call now user friendly.
Yeah.
So he hired Bill and Paul to start the computer up without having to toggle everything. Okay, and this was when they were back in Seattle in somebody's garage. I think it was Allen's. And they came up with a way of starting this thing up, and it was on paper tape. No, I lie. It was on magnetic tape, kind of like the reel-to-reel.
Yeah.
And so they got it up, they got it software and got it on the magnetic tape. And so Paul flew out here to demonstrate it. Well, when Paul flew out here, he had $42 in his pocket. And so he got here and called up Ed Roberts. And so Ed went and picked him up at the airport, took him down to the office, and had the reel-to-reel and everything. And it was about a 8-foot piece of tape that they stuck in this machine, and it booted up. And booted up the first time, and it worked perfectly.
Wow.
And this is a story that I got directly from Paul Allen. And so they were happy as clams. And Paul wanted a place to stay. Didn't have any money, so Ed Roberts had to, he got him a room down at the Wyndham hotel there by the airport, and paid for it, because Paul Allen didn't have any money, and took him out to pay, just everything.
So college kid comes out with the tool, but not prepared.
Yeah. And so they got a agreement that Allen and Gates were to do the software for the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really know the ins and outs of that agreement, but after they started to become successful, and of course Robert Gates and Paul had a office. It was now in the Bank of America, or First National Bank, or it's the big tall bank there off of Central and San Mateo.
Uh-huh.
And MITS at that time, they had just moved into the Lynn building, which was in back of that.
Okay.
And that's where they were putting these kits together. So back to Gates and the rest. anyway, after it became somewhat successful, uh, Gates wanted the rights to BASIC,
Right.
and of course, since Ed decided, I bought the thing, it's mine. What is this kid doing, wanting to have
Yeah.
my program back? So they had a pretty nasty lawsuit, and Gates indeed won. So I don't know what.
Intellectual property.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know the ins and outs of the agreement, and that's a story I got.
Well, the first thing would be your background. What got you to the MITS? Where were you prior?
Oh my! I had several technical jobs for writing manuals for the Sergeant Missile, which is way back when. And then I put in to McDonnell Douglas. They were hiring for the Saturn V project. And so I went in on McDonnell Douglas in Huntington Beach at the Space Systems Center there. And as a young kid, they threw me in charge of the Systems Integration Laboratory, SIL, which was basically a room full of the components on the Saturn V that we hooked together and actually flew missions, making sure that all the switches and things, the timing and all of that worked. And of course, that was my first interview or interest in computers, that we had a room about the size of my living room, air conditioned, and all kinds of upright cabinets with vacuum tubes like crazy to keep track of all this, and of course reel to reels and everything else. Then after that, I got roped into a bunch of black projects that we won't talk about. And then a fella and I decided, well, hey, let's go do a boat business. So we did. And that lasted pretty good, and we worked on big yachts. And the funny thing about that, the people that can afford these big yachts can't afford to have them serviced. So, enough of that, and we decided to part ways. I met Lucy, and we decided we had enough of Southern California, and we took off in a Chevrolet van and toured the part of the United States, went to Wisconsin, where she's from, came back here and looked around and thought it was pretty good. We did our homework a little bit, and we were driving up this road, 2-lane road, nothing there but dirt, and we ran into this area with 2 houses, exactly what we wanted. No job, no nothing, very little money. And so we bought the house, and I said, I probably ought to get a job to pay for this thing. And there was an ad in the paper for a company called MITS, and they wanted someone that could do electronic packaging. And so I went down there and dazzled them with my brilliance and a few McDonnell Douglas schematics and drawings and everything. And the fools hired me. And the first thing I had to do was to do a circuit on a 4K memory board.
Oh, wow.
Wow, they had 2K, but they wanted to double that. And none of them could put it together. Well, it took me a bit, but I did get 4K on that board. And I guess they thought I walked on water, because It just could not be done. And so I took over the drafting department and mechanical engineering, and we designed several upgrades for the 8080 for the Altair,
Uh-huh.
and did some business systems and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then they wanted me to do the industrial design for the attaché, which was basically the Altair in a fancy cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the vacuum form thing that I made. And
Okay.
and that was a full pop Altair in that thing.
Oh, wow.
And by that time, you could type in to boot the thing up. There was no more mag tapes, paper tapes.
Right.
And it had 2 Shugart drives. And so that was my background, sort of getting into that. I walked in one day and found out that Ed sold the company to Pertec. And I walked out without a job, so I had to rummage around. I finally went I went to work for what is now Honeywell.
Oh, yeah.
There on the base. It was EG&G, and did a bunch of black stuff, so
How long were you with MITS?
till they closed the company. Oh my. Early 80s, I think, when they
Wow.
closed up. I really don't remember.
Oh, what was Ed Roberts like?
His persona at work was very straightforward and not a heck of a lot of kidding around. He seemed to be very focused on what he was doing. And entrepreneurs in that position are pretty much like that. That they're very focused. They don't care what's happening over there. They're right down.
He was in it for the money over the love of electronics? Or a little of both?
Little of both. Little of both. He was not happy going to the bank to try to get money.
Okay.
When they decided to build the Altair, the Altair 8080 with chip, he had to go to the bank and get $5,000. Now, that started out with them running a article in Popular Science
Right.
that they had a semi-schematic done.
Mm-hmm.
They did not have it packaged, so they went out and they bought a cabinet, and I'll think of the name of it in a minute, and punched a bunch of holes in it, put 32 switches in the thing, and a couple of lights and an on-off switch, took a picture of it, sent it to Popular Science, and they got so much interest in the thing that they started getting orders for the thing.
Oh.
So Ed went down and grumbled for some money,
Right.
and when that thing came out in Popular Science, Optima is the cabinet company,
Okay.
and they've been around forever. They started out, the first week was about 100 kits.
Wow.
This was not, they didn't build anything. It was
Right.
just
Yeah.
a bunch of parts in a box and a schematic. Go build the damn thing.
Yeah.
About 100. And then that came out. And the second week they had orders for, I believe it was 3,000. and the week after that it was orders for, I believe, 5,000.
Wow.
And it just kept going nuts.
Wow.
So they had to move from Lynn Avenue, and they had girls putting the things together,
Mm-hmm.
but they moved to by the airport, and had a big building built just for MITS, and I believe it was on Alamo. Yes,
Okay.
right there where the hotel is in the back. I think now Honeywell has that area. And so he had his big office and everything with the shower
Wow.
and first rate. And he was pretty focused on what he was doing. He would come around. He always wore a plaid sports coat that I've ever seen him in. And he'd always walk around with a carton of cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd take a cigarette out, and he'd light it, take 2 puffs, and put it out. I have no idea why. Maybe it was his doctoring coming through. Or something.
You shouldn't smoke, but
That's
you're
right,
addicted.
but I'm going to do it. So that's kind of what Ed was. Seemed to be a very nice fellow. Very nice.
And your experience was just in the workplace, no outside?
No.
Yeah. Was he native to here?
I don't know. He and Eddie Currie and Bill Yates, they started a company, MITS, Micro Instrumentation and Telemetry Systems.
Mm-hmm.
And that was for model rockets. It was the telemetry systems for model rockets.
Wow.
And then from there, they got into the calculators, and they had a MITS calculator, and I had one until it crapped out, and they were fine. And then Casio came out, and
End of story.
yeah. So they had to find something else. So they got together and decided, hey, let's build a computer. It's kind of like, hey, let's put on a stage play, you know?
Yeah, total left field there. So beyond when MITS sold, you lost all contact then.
Yes. Yes. I retained with some of the people,
Yeah.
but Triumph Adler is the one that bought them out. Volkswagen owned Triumph. And they were concerned that they had the European version of the Altair,
Okay.
and they were concerned about the being able to sell that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just bought the competitor, packaged it up, took it back to Europe, never to be seen again.
And that's when he went back to the tree farm?
Well,
Or doctoring?
both. Ed always wanted to be a country doctor. So after he sold the company, and I think he walked away, I get 2 stories, with $3 million or $5 million
Okay.
cash. And remember, this is the early 80s.
Employees get nothing.
We got a decent severance
Okay.
pay.
So he took care of you.
Yeah, and I bought a share or 2 of MITS stock that was not on the board, but you could get it through a broker. And so I about tripled or something my money, and so I was happy. What the hell? But anyway, Roberts always wanted to be a doctor, and when he sold that, he bought the acreage down in Georgia, I believe, and bought a D9 Caterpillar to clear it. Sold all the lumber. I think it was loblolly pines or some goofy thing. And so he sold that, made a bunch of money on that. Built a house, built a barn that was full of everything that Hewlett Packard ever made.
Oh, wow.
And he went to medical school and became a country doctor. And that's what he loved doing. And that's what he did till he died.
What was your experience with Gates? And this is what, mind you, the late 70s, right?
Yeah, yeah. I did not have a lot of interaction with him. I was more mechanical.
Mm-hmm.
And Eddie Currie, Dr. Currie, a physicist, would chauffeur him around because he was a young kid. Fine with me. And so he and Eddie were probably closer than the most of them. What was he like? I don't know. He was just very quiet. Everybody that I knew, we were at a MITS party, Christmas party, and he came in with Eddie. And everybody would just say, "Oh, there's Bill Gates." Mm-hmm. And here's some young kid with glasses on. So I think Ed Currie sort of parted ways with Gates when they had the big lawsuit and everything.
Yeah.
They were taking depositions and everything, and Ed didn't tell me a lot.
Right.
Ed and I were fairly close. But
did you get to know Alan?
Paul Allen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a picture of him with my arm around him at the reunion in 94 or 5, something like that. I forget when it was. It was down at the downtown at the convention center.
Okay.
And that's when they photographed the Revenge of the Nerds. And that was on PBS once or twice. I don't know where it is now. And there's pictures of all of us.
Okay.
Gates was not at the thing because Ed Roberts was there, and Ed Currie, and a bunch of the other fellows that.
Bad blood.
Yeah. And so he didn't show up.
But Alan
is a very nice fellow, quite a gentleman.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice. I was sad to see that he went, but a nice guy.
Yeah. And what other?
Very smart.
Outside of the whole company thing?
Yes. He was a Renaissance man. In fact, Alan was going to school and taking some art class. He took calligraphy.
Huh.
And he fell in love with calligraphy. So when they decided, he and Gates decided, all right, what fonts are we going to use on our products?
Mm-hmm.
Alan said, well, let's give them a choice. So the fonts that you have on your computer today belong to Paul Allen. A little inside.
That's kind of
trivial.
Yeah.
Who cares? He was very interested in just about everything, and particularly oceanography.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe he had 2 or 3 little boats. You and I called them ships.
Yeah.
And that was what he wanted to do.